Hello everyone, my name is Dishti Sharma and today I will be talking about the Epidemic Diseases Act Ordinance 2020. Let us start by understanding what the terms epidemic and pandemic mean. An epidemic is a disease that affects many people within a community, population or region. Whereas a pandemic is an epidemic that simply spread over multiple countries or continents. The currently widespread disease of coronavirus first started off as an epidemic but is now a global pandemic affecting many people all over the world. In India, the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 also covers the coronavirus disease. The Epidemic Diseases Act 1897. The Epidemic Diseases Act was first introduced in the year 1897 to deal with the bubonic plague in Mumbai. The main purpose of this act was to manage the epidemics by giving special powers that are required to implement containment measures to control the spread of the disease. This act was also implemented to contain few other epidemics in India like swine flu, cholera, malaria, dengue, etc. In the present day scenario, this act is being enforced across India in order to limit the spread of coronavirus disease since March 2020. Previously, this act was implemented in the year 2018 in Gujarat to prevent the spread of cholera. It was also enforced in Chandigarh in the year 2015 to prevent the spread of dengue and in 2019 in Pune to prevent the spread of the swine flu virus. The Act itself is not a very lengthy one. It contains only 4 sections. Section 2 of the Act gives power to the state government to take measures and enforce temporary regulations in case of an outbreak of any dangerous epidemic disease. In such a situation, the state government may take all necessary steps in order to curb the spread of the disease and also determine in what manner the expenses relating to the process are going to be incurred. Further, Section 2A gives power to the central government to take measures and prescribe temporary regulations to prevent the outbreak of any dangerous disease. This also includes inspection of any ship or vessel leaving or arriving at any international port. Section 3 of the Act gives provisions for penalizing any person disobeying any regulation or order made under this Act. In case a person does so, it will be considered as an offence punishable under Section 188 of the Indian Penal Code. The last section, that is Section 4 of this Act, provides protection to the persons acting under the Act. According to this section, no suit or other legal proceeding shall lie against any person for anything done in good faith that was intended to be done under the Act. Now that we have a brief idea about the Epidemic Diseases Act, let us move on to the Epidemic Diseases Act Ordinance 2020. The Epidemic Diseases Act Ordinance 2020 was passed on April 22, 2020, and it amends the Epidemic Diseases Act 1897. This ordinance aims to provide protection for healthcare personnel fighting against diseases. It also expands the powers given to the central government to prevent the spread of diseases. This ordinance has introduced the definition of a healthcare personnel, that is, a person who is at risk of contracting the epidemic disease while carrying out duties relating to the epidemic. This includes all public and clinical healthcare providers such as doctors, nurses, any person to whom this act gives power to prevent the outbreak of diseases, and any other person designated by the state government. According to this amendment, any act of violence committed upon such healthcare personnel or any such person responsible to prevent the spread of diseases shall be considered a violation of this act. However, it is to be noted that the protection of healthcare workers from an act of violence under this act is only applicable during the course of the epidemic. What does an act of violence mean with reference to this act? An act of violence, according to this act, is harassment impacting living or working conditions, harm, injury, or hurt or danger to life, obstruction in discharge of duties, loss or damage of personal property or documents of such individual. What can be referred to as a healthcare personnel's property? A healthcare personnel's property can include clinical establishment, quarantine facility, mobile medical clinic, other property in which a healthcare service personnel has direct interest in relation to the epidemic. How does the ordinance protect healthcare personnel? The ordinance clearly mentions that no person can commit or abet the commission of an act of violence against such person or abet or cause damage to loss of property of such person during the epidemic. What is the punishment for violation of this act? Any act of violence against a healthcare personnel is a cognizable and non-bailable offence, and it is punishable with imprisonment between 3 months and 5 years, along with a fine of Rs 50,000 to Rs 2 lakh. Further, if such act of violence against a healthcare personnel causes grievous harm, then the person committing the offence will be punishable under this act for a time period of 6 months to 7 years, along with a fine of Rs 1 lakh to Rs 5 lakh. What is the compensation provided to the aggrieved party in case of a violation? The aggrieved party is supposed to receive compensation in case of a violation, and the person who has been convicted for the commission of the offence is liable to pay such compensation to the aggrieved party. The amount of compensation to be awarded is to be decided by the court, but in cases where there is damage to property, the culprit is liable to pay twice the amount of the current market value of the property that is lost or damaged. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought up various challenges, and our healthcare workers are putting in their best efforts to overcome the situation. Healthcare personnel and their families are inevitably put in a vulnerable state due to the nature of the healthcare workers' jobs. Therefore, this amendment was direly needed to protect the healthcare workers and their families during the pandemic. This ordinance will help to re-establish confidence and trust in the healthcare community, which in turn will help them to contribute their best to fight off this difficult situation. Thank you.